Okay, so hello everyone. So I hope everyone's having a great day. Thank you to our guest speaker today for joining us to talk about her law journey, and just thank you to everyone who is tuning in to this session as well. Um, First things first, I just want to give a really brief overview about what Pre-Law Shadowers is and what it's about. So basically, Pre-Law Shadowers is just a student-led organization dedicated to providing pre-law students across universities in Ontario with virtual shadowing opportunities. And our goal is just to help young students engage and learn more about the legal careers that they plan to pursue. And I know it can be difficult to find learning opportunities alone. So that's why we started this organization in the hopes that it can be both accessible and educationally fulfilling for students. And lastly, our sessions are aimed to learn more about different lawyers with regards to both their academic and professional journeys. So I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. My name is Zainab Ali. I'm a second year student at Ontario Tech University. I am majoring in political sciences, and my future goal is to become a lawyer. I'm not sure which kind of law yet, and I will be hosting the session today. So without further delay, I will now ask our guest speaker today to introduce herself.
Thanks, Zainab. So my name is Joy Wakefield. Currently, I am the bilingual staff lawyer in Thunder Bay for Legal Aid Ontario. As well, within that, I'm in an elected position for the Lawyers Union, which is separate from the union that deals with some of the other employees at LAO. And we're affiliated with the Society of United Professionals. So I'm in the unit director role with respect to that. So I do some criminal law and some labor relations. In terms of some of the other hats that I wear, I'm director of the board for the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center, which is the major tertiary hospital in northwestern Ontario. And I dabble in other things like that. I taught for a bit and have worked briefly for a tribal council and have done a few other things. I try to engage in different community initiatives that are going on. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, okay. Well, you have a lot on your plate, and that's amazing. I guess I'll just start with asking you some questions, which I already have so many. So, at what point in your life did you decide you want to pursue a legal career?
So for me, it's funny. I was at one point reading this article in the New York Times, which I think was titled something along the lines of what it's like to be not a straight white male in Hollywood. And they were interviewing different celebrities. And one of the people was Jimmy Smits. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's a famous Latino actor who starred in
Mm.
LA Law and some other shows. And he played a lawyer on this show. And he said in this quotation that he started getting invited to speak at bar association conferences and all kinds of things because as soon as he was on this show, Latino enrollment skyrocketed in law school. And I said, oh, that's silly. Who goes to law school because of TV? And then I realized, oh, yeah, me. I totally decided to go to law school because I loved watching Law and Order. And as much as I go back and watch some of these shows and shake my head at the some of the politics and some of the very large inaccuracies in some of what goes on. That was that idea of seeking justice and doing the right thing was sort of a big part of it, and seeing these people like Abigail Carmichael and Carrie Lowell and those people
Mhm.
represent TV made a difference and kind of inspired me.
Well, no, that's pretty cool. I mean, I know some people do like, want to become a lawyer because they see it on like TV shows like Suits and like all of this stuff. So I think it's pretty cool. And I think that like maybe it's not all that they think it is on TV, but then, yeah. What do you think? Like, is it like how did you react when you actually got into the law field compared to like when you were watching those like TV shows and all that?
Yes, quite a while between the desire and actually getting there. So I
Yeah.
feel like what I thought about it and what I wanted to do changed a lot and sort of
Mm.
meandered as I went on and then eventually figured it out. So initially, I wanted to be a crown attorney, and then it kind of morphed into maybe I'll do something international, and that's not entirely still off the table, but it's not something I'm currently doing anyway. And I didn't really have an understanding of exactly what the content of that would be, but
Mhm.
thought it sounded cool. And then I sort of ended up in criminal defense, more by circumstances than necessarily having chosen that. But it's definitely become a big part of who I am and what I'm passionate about.
Yeah,
In terms of the TV representation, I mean, there are moments that are always going to be like that. I find that shows like Law and Order, I mean, they focus almost exclusively on murders, right? So
yeah,
murder trials are going to be a very different thing, and they make it sound like it's a quick and dirty kind of thing. It's often like 2 years later, and you're still dealing with this case, and
yeah,
you know what I mean. So there can be if you're cramming that all into an hour, it
yeah.
doesn't really do justice to what you actually do as a lawyer sometimes.
Wow, okay, well, that's very interesting, and I think a lot of people, need to hear that, like, it's not, very accurate, but that's okay, like, so that's good.
Drama
Um,
accurate.
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of
Um, and then that leads me to my second question, that what program or courses did you study in your undergraduate program and, like, at which university?
so I did a business degree kind of on a whim. I was initially going to study political science or something. I don't even remember which program I was applying to, but something like that. And then a friend of mine who also ended up going to law school, interestingly, was like, "Oh, I'm applying to this Schulich International Business Program." So I applied to the IBBA program. He ended up doing the BBA, but I did it and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought the people were fantastic people, um, and the courses were really interesting. In terms of some of the courses we took, we had to take so sort of like the core business courses. So you're dealing with economics, management, accounting, statistics, finance, those kinds of things. And then there were marketing courses and supply chain modeling, corporate strategy, and then there were sort of a lot of electives you could kind of take around those things. Um, so my business electives typically focused around organizational behavior, industrial relations, which is sort of like the psychology business crossover, as well as marketing. I really like doing the marketing stuff, especially the creative. I, I loved Mad Men, so I was big
Yeah,
into kind of, oh yeah, I could totally do this. And then we also had to, because it was the international program, we had to do an exchange. We had to study language, so I studied French and a little bit of Spanish as well. And I took a couple like fun courses here and there. I went from Scarborough to York University. So I was often trying to take random things that would fit into my schedule so I didn't have to be on campus as much.
yeah.
Um, so not every single course I took was like the best course I've ever studied. It was like, okay, well, this fits and that's the only thing that's available. So we're going with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the bulk of what I studied and the courses I took.
No, well, I think that's super interesting that you say that, you took in like courses that were fun too, because I feel like a lot of people, whether law school, med school, I feel like they feel like they have to take like, the courses only that are specific to their program or whatever. But like I feel like it's important to like branch out sometimes and try things because you don't want to, over exhaust yourself either. So
I took a course in creative writing, which was you could look at that and say, oh, well, that's a silly course. But you know what? It gave me tons of opportunity to write, tons of opportunity to get feedback on my writing, which you often don't.
yeah.
Uh, and in other kinds of courses or programs, not at that level. And so that really did a lot for improving my writing skills. And I also
Mhm.
took drama for non majors, which I highly recommend. I
Yeah.
highly recommend if you want to go to law school, especially if you want to litigate, take take a drama course because you will learn a lot about presentation skills. You will learn a
Mhm.
lot about how you carry yourself physically. You will learn a lot about how to project your voice, how to change your voice, how to, do what you need to do in order to create I don't want to say persona like you're
Mhm.
being a fake kind of person, but you can tell people who have presentation skills. And in business school, presentation skills were really important because everything was
Mhm.
a presentation of a group project. So, and in law school and as a litigator, that really matters, your stage presence, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
look at the skills you want to get and take stuff that you enjoy, because especially in your undergrad, you need to do well at it in order to get into law school. So take stuff you're going to have fun with.
Exactly, and I think that's so cool because I'm sure a lot of people don't associate law school with drama, and I feel like that is, I think that's really great advice because, I feel like a lot of things that you don't think will help, like, they do end up helping in the long run, so I think that's pretty cool. Um, and then and I know a lot of people are whoever's going into law school and they're really stressing about this. So how was the LSAT and law school admission process like for you?
So for me, I can't tell you that I remember all of it. It
Okay.
was very important to me at the time, but
It's
it's
okay.
been a bit of a while since then. So
Mm.
I'll give you a little bit of what I remember.
Okay.
Um, I remember that at the time it was terribly bureaucratic and an awful user interface, like really, really bad, to like where we were copying and pasting things into, I don't know if I'm using correct terms, but you'd be in like text only kinds of software functions. So you'd be trying to like manually create bullet points, and just it was awful. I think I had to create like a just text only version of my resume, which has come in handy in FYI. But it can be annoying to sort of keep a whole lot of versions of your resume up to date. But it is important to track those kinds of things. A lot of people think, oh, I haven't done that many things. But when you actually start writing it all down, you're like, oh, I have done a lot of things.
Yeah.
Uh, and you might forget about some of them. So, keep your school agendas handy and refer to them on occasion, jot little notes down, and keep track of what you're doing. So in terms of that, don't wait till the last minute to fill out those forms and that information. I don't know if it's still that bad. It wouldn't shock me if it is, but hopefully we've moved on since, in about a decade and a half since I was applying to law school.
Mm.
Um, Try to, I mean, whatever the rules are, I'm not sure, they may have changed, but if you're submitting stuff, have people go over it so that you catch things
Yeah.
that you've missed. You will miss things even though you've gone over it about 5 times at least before you submit it. Um, be strategic, if you can, about references. That can be challenging if you don't feel like you make good connections with professors or other things like that. So try to, if there's a course that you really like that you think you're going to do really well in, try your best to actually connect personally with the professor, because some professors will say, you know what, if you got an A in my class, I'll write you a reference. It'll just be a standard kind of reference. But it can be helpful to have more of a connection with people. Although I don't know how much stock they place in those kinds of things compared to other people. Make your application count, because it costs money to do this and to do it repeatedly, right? But
Yeah.
also, if you don't get in the first time, that's also okay. You know, Lots of people don't. And lots of people apply later as mature students and then, go through the process and find it a little bit easier, and that they have a lot more sort of on their resume and things like that. So don't count yourself out if you did an undergrad and you're 22 and you're like, my dream is to be a lawyer and now it's been taken away. Well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Consider doing a master's degree. Consider working for a few years. Like, none of those things are going to take away the possibility of a legal degree. One of the law professors we had, who unfortunately has now passed away at Queens, he went to law school when he was 50. And at one point, I was teaching at the law school here, and I had a student in my class who was in her 70s. Like,
Wow.
it is never too late to go to law
Yeah.
school. So uh, don't despair. In terms of the LSAT, um, practice.
Yeah.
Like, don't go in there and think you can wing that. You need to study, you need to practice, you need to discipline yourself. What I can say is you can do all the practice questions in the world, but if you have not sat down and wrote a whole practice exam, that's what's going to help you, because the LSAT is not about being smart. It's about endurance.
Yeah.
I'm serious about that. It is one thing to be smart for the first hour of the LSAT. It is another thing to be smart the sixth hour of that LSAT when you're really tired and your brain is done and you're like, I just need to go home. I'm gonna fill in C for the rest of this. I didn't do that, but uh, you will notice a big shift. Like, I noticed a dramatic increase in errors as I went through the exam. So full practice exams where you have, whoever it is sit down, time you, actually make you do it like you would, is going to be the way that you need to really discipline yourself once you've kind of gotten a feel for how the questions go.
Mm.
So that's my advice on that. And also, it can be very stressful. So the things that you can do to reduce your stress when you're actually writing that exam will be really helpful to you. So don't go late. If it's in a different city, like, stay overnight. Don't drive there at 5 o'clock in the morning. Like,
Yeah.
do that. If you can afford it at all, try to do that. Go to the venue in advance so you have a little idea of where you're going to be, so you're a little more familiar with it. Maybe that sounds super nerdy, but I think it's important to kind of case things out. That can really help reduce your stress, because then on the day you're not sort of lost and panicking and in the wrong place. Like, all those things really just make it difficult. Um, in terms of other just tips generally, look again to what you're performing well in terms of your courses and things like that, because obviously your marks do matter, but it doesn't necessarily matter that you get all A's from the beginning. It matters that you show a progression. If you don't have A's from the beginning, right, that you're learning over time, that you're getting stronger as a candidate. um, Spend time sitting and reflecting on why you want to apply to law school,
Yeah.
because that will help you write a personal statement as well. Like, some people struggle with those kinds of things, but really sit down and think about it, right? And sitting down and reflecting is not something that we're really taught to do in university very often. Sometimes we reflect on things, but we don't often reflect ourselves or think
Mhm.
about, okay, well, what do I really want? Why do I want this? Why is this important to me? Is this important to me? Am I doing this for my parents? Am I doing this because I really actually want to go? um, and so that can be useful. um, Reach out to people from the law schools that you want to go to. Most lawyers and most law students and faculty of different places are willing to be helpful and a resource to you. One of the things that you sort of don't realize a lot of the time when you're in the process is that you can actually do those kinds of things. You can look up school websites and you can reach out to people, like the dean of students for the law school, for example. Not necessarily the dean of the law school, but there will be, someone who liaises with students or other things like that. So you can email them and say, hey, I'd love to talk to a law student about, what law school is like, what your law school is like, etc. You can reach out to lawyers on a website, on a firm website, and see, oh, you went to Osgood. I'm interested in going there. What was your experience like? What area of law do you practice, etc. A lot of people are very happy to answer these questions and
Mm.
have students reaching out to them. So that's something that you can do in order to supplement your website research about what law schools to go to, because I find that talking to people is helpful in terms of figuring out what the experience is actually like. Um, One of the things people are going to have to think about right now is, what is the experience of law school going to be? I mean, some people thought law school was going to be in-person studies, and then we're online for most of COVID, right? And then we're writing exams online. Court is online for the most part right
Mhm.
now. It's a very different experience than actually litigating in a courtroom. So given the shift that we're sort of experiencing as a society, like keep those kinds of aspects in mind too about, what it might look like going forward, and whether that's something that you're interested in. Um, yeah, and so in terms of, thinking about what schools you actually want to apply to, I would say number one, look at the options, not just the cost, although cost is obviously going to be important. But look at, are there particular professors that work there that you're interested in working with? Are there particular specialties or focuses that the school has? What kind of a network do they have? What kind of administrative support? I thought this this is really interesting. One of my friends said um, she decided to go to Queens because she toured different campuses and Queens had the best administrative staff of anywhere. And I
Mm,
said, that is a really strange reason to pick a law school. But you know what? She was not wrong. The support staff made that experience. Like
mm,
they really did. Because, there are going to be smart people at every place. But Queens had like an amazing equity person, had an amazing dean of students who was absolutely, like, let's kill five birds with one stone. How can we, make your schedule work for you and get all the right things that you need? And like, they were just super great in terms of really wanting everyone to succeed. Um, and equity support, you know, not just maybe if you sort of feel like that's something you're really going to need, but also I think it's important to sort of see, what are the values that the school has, and are they my values, and do I like sort of the direction that the school is taking. um and a lot of law schools will have like this huge course list of, oh, these are all our courses. Some of them is like that course ran once like in the 90s.
mm,
So just keep that in mind. There are going to be core courses that have been, repeatedly offered, but you really need to investigate a little bit more sometimes in terms of what's actually going to be available, what professors are still actually teaching there, tenured there, etc. So if there are those things, make sure you kind of dig a little bit if you can. um, be pragmatic. Sometimes you have an idea, oh, I'll stay at home and I'll go to Osgood or U of T if you live in Toronto, for example. But do the math, right? Sometimes
mm,
going to a school somewhere else, you get free transportation at most of the schools that are outside Toronto, right?
mm,
You go to Queens, you get a bus pass. If you go to Windsor, I think you get a bus pass. If you go to Ottawa, I don't know. But sometimes that makes a big difference. Sometimes there will be lower cost accommodation, depending on whether or not you're living at home or things like that. Sometimes the commute, like
yeah,
the commute can really kill you over time. If
definitely.
you're spending tons of time every day on Toronto Transit, for example. So look at other options, and places that you have connections, and all those kinds of things. Um, Obviously schools are going to highlight their strengths and not their weaknesses, so ask tough questions to people that you speak to, about equity. Look at school governance, like who's running the school. Look at job and placement, things. Talk to students about how easy it was to find a job. um, ask about career resources, the career resource center, because a lot of people will have opinions about that and how helpful they were. And that's a really important resource. At Schulich, for example, my understanding is that at any point I can go back to their resource center because I'm an alum. I'm an alumna.
Mm,
Some schools restrict that. I knew a student who's at Osgood doing a master's, and they refused to give them access to the career portal ever. Like, I don't understand that, but that's okay. So I would send them postings and stuff and try to help them out. Look at different criticisms of schools in the media. Google them. See what kind of news they're making. Um, look at different. You can also reach out. So for example, if equity is important to you, reach out to an equity lawyer group.
mm,
So the Indigenous Law Association or Bar Association, in your particular region or nationally, FACL, the Black Lawyers Association, different kind of groups. I'm probably getting their names wrong a little bit, but sometimes I know the acronym, but I don't know what they all stand
Yeah.
for. So look into those kinds of things and see what people say. So that was a lot of information, but I hope that was a little bit helpful in terms of trying to figure out what schools to apply to and all of that, because I know it can be difficult to kind of think, how do I evaluate a law school when you haven't gone there and you sort of don't understand.
Yeah.
I would say for me, the admin support is a really important point looking back. Network is also a really important point looking back. Um, and the courses you take are important, but ultimately they're a very small part of a legal career. So, if you place big emphasis on some of the things that aren't as lasting, um, you'll end up with a different experience. If you go to a law school where it's very big, you find it hard to connect with people. There aren't a lot of student groups, or there's not a lot of participation in things. You'll have a very different experience, right?
Mhm. No, I'm glad you went into detail because um I think it's important to know that you shouldn't just apply because like something sounds good. I think obviously like you said you really need to do your own research and see if it's something that interests you and like again why are you doing law? And what you said in the very beginning about like you can get into law school at any age. I feel like that's so important to touch on because nowadays I feel like it's all a race in some kind of sense like who can finish first, when am I going to get into school, and like when can I get my first job, but like I feel like it's more of you like going in when you're ready, so I think that mentioning that someone who went gone to law school at 50 years old and at 70 years old, like that's really important to consider, because like you said, like you can get into law school at any age, it's not a race, so that's very important
The
to
tortoise
consider.
wins.
Yes, exactly.
The tortoise
Um,
knows what he wants.
yeah, exactly, and that's so important. I feel like and especially in this day and age, I feel like that's really important to touch
Mhm.
on. Um, so what do you like most about this field that you're in right now?
So,
Yeah.
uh, to clarify for people who maybe forgot
Yeah.
already or don't know too much. So I work for Legal Aid Ontario, um, and we do primarily we're quasi public defenders. So if you watch American TV, you've probably heard that expression. You might have heard the expression duty lawyers or duty counsel, things like that. That's a big part of what we do. Legal Aid Ontario both has different services it provides directly and has clinics that it funds in different areas of law as well. There are community clinics and there are also specialty clinics. I work for Legal Aid proper, so I do mainly criminal defense. I've dabbled a little bit in family. And then obviously through that, I also worked for a tribal council doing stuff that was a little more tangential, sort of to the criminal thing. And then also the labor relations thing on the side. So um, in terms of criminal defense, what I have enjoyed about it, I think up front, I and a lot of people that I talk to sort of think, "Oh, how can you defend people? That sounds so terrible." Or that that they're guilty, that they've done things. Um, what I like to think of my role is state accountability. That's what my role fundamentally is, because it doesn't matter if people have done things, they may have, but the state has to be able to prove it. The state has to treat people appropriately, regardless of who somebody is or isn't.
Yeah.
And we have to treat people equally. So a lot of criminal law is realizing that we treat people very differently depending on who they are, right? And it's actually a pretty scary reality. Sometimes, you can steal $1 billion. And if you work for a bank and you have enough power and social clout, you might never get charged.
Yeah.
But if you are a very poor, um, very dark-skinned individual and you walk into a Walmart and you take a banana, like they might tackle you to the ground in the parking lot and call the police and prosecute you
Yeah.
over a $2 banana, which is a complete waste of public resources. But they want to keep their property safe, right? So it's a very interesting thing when you start working in the system and you start realizing a lot of what's going on. For some people, that's not going to be a surprise. For some people, it might be a bit of a surprise. So a lot of what I do revolves around bail court or sentencing. So bail court is where people have been arrested by the police and then held. Police can release people. There are different forms of release that sort of go in increasing seriousness, and the court can release people obviously as well. Again, with increasing amounts of condition, for example, or with money, or with somebody else vouching for them, etc. So we try to help people put together bail plans. That's a big part of what we do. And if we're in other courts, we're just trying to get people next court dates. We're trying to help people make progress with their matters. We're trying to help negotiate, see if we can come to a deal that everyone's good with, trying to tell people if they should take their matter to trial or not. And then, if they're in sentencing court, then representing them at sentencing, trying to get them the best position possible, or, if it's negotiated in advance, then trying to make submissions that do justice to humanizing the person standing next to you, and um, help to just put people's humanity forward, and help people remember that we all make mistakes, and we all need to learn lessons at different times. So that's a lot of what I do. I don't know if you have any sort of follow-up questions around, um, sort of connected to that. In terms of the labor relations I did, or that I continue to do, that involves some in similar vein representation. So if an employee has a disciplinary issue, if someone needs an accommodation at work, if um, there's something that happens in the workplace and there's a health and safety issue, whatever it is, we help to represent employees vis-a-vis the employer and help to ensure that their rights are protected as well. So
Very nice. Yeah, I think it's important, right, to see like what, like you said before too, like what you like about your field and everything, and like just to know like why you're doing it. So I think
mhm.
that's very interesting. And yeah, it kind of, I guess it is a follow-up question is what is like a typical day in your career in terms of responsibilities and tasks aside from what you've mentioned?
Yeah. So a lot of days are very different depending on which
Mhm.
court that I'm stationed in. So in terms of criminal court, if I'm in first appearance court or set date court, then I'm going to be helping people, a lot of people, and I'm going to be trying to triage matters really quickly. So talk to as many people as I can, get a sense in a very short period of time of what they need to do to get a next court date. So do they have the crown brief yet? If they don't have the brief, which is the file that contains all the evidence, then they need that first. So how do we get that into their hands? If they have that, have they reviewed it with someone? If not, okay, can we chat about it? See what you want to do based on it. If they've had a chat with someone, well, what's their decision? How do they want to move this matter forward? Do they want to schedule a plea? Do they want to get a lawyer and have a trial? So stuff like that. If it's bail court, we're typically putting together plans, or I'm running hearings based on bail plans to try to get people released. So that can, range from more simple kind of stuff to very complex matters where there are, multiple people vouching for this person. We have to cross-examine people on the record, those kinds of things. Um, if it's sentencing court, then it might be more chill. There's probably a scheduled matter or two, and then I might be doing some other appointments or things like that. I might be in satellite court, so I might be driving a number of hours and
Yeah.
being in a different community and trying to figure out what's going on there. Those courts are sort of a mixed bag because everything's all together instead of in different segmented kind of courts. So you might be doing a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
depending on how it all shakes out. So that's in terms of criminal. That's kind of what I'm touching. Um, family can be um, family, it tends to be a little more scheduled and a little less hectic. So you kind of know when your matters are going to come up and what kind of court you're going to be dealing with. There are still also family duty counsel that deal with people sort of on an ad hoc, here you are, you need immediate assistance kind of basis. Legal aid also does represent like ongoing representation for clients and family. So you might be doing interviews, you might be doing summary legal advice for that. You might be doing motions, like arguing something about a case or settlement conferences where you all sit at a table and sort of try to figure out what you agree on. It might look like there are child welfare files where you might be trying to assist individuals who are dealing with children's aid or another welfare agency and trying to help them get their kids back or trying to help work out what the issue is.
Mhm.
Um, there is sometimes other kind of tangential work. So sometimes you're in committee work. So you need to go to a bail committee meeting and talk to the other stakeholders about what things are working and not working. Sometimes you might be doing related kinds of things. So some days you're going to be working on professional development and getting in your educational pieces and doing other kind of administrative related stuff. When I was working for the tribal council, I was often traveling to different communities um, and hosting legal clinics. So people would make appointments, come talk to me. I would try to help them out. And we would do also sort of like planning work to try to figure out how to meet different communities' needs, what their priorities were for justice services. Um, and then in terms of teaching, when I was teaching, it was a lot of work of planning a curriculum, trying to figure out how I wanted to teach, what I wanted the course to be like, what my values were in terms of how I wanted to evaluate the course and things like that, tweaking it. Yeah, sometimes there were other even more tangential kinds of things like grant writing, strategic planning, meetings. So lots of different things depending, and having those different roles kind of makes it interesting as well because you're doing a lot of different things. But those are some of the basics.
It was really cool that, like, it isn't I feel like for a lot of people, they don't like doing the same thing every single day, so it's kinda, like, good, that, like, even though it might be hectic sometimes, that there's something different to do every day, so that's really, like, good to know. Um, the next question I have is, like, what is a common misconception about lawyers, like, that you hear about the most, do you think?
Yeah. So um, I often hear the lawyers are untrustworthy.
Mhm.
Exception. The lawyers are liars and all that kind of thing. That all lawyers are out to win everything. They're all super competitive.
Yeah.
Um, that some of the stereotypes are true. Most lawyers are not good at math.
Yeah.
Lawyers can be very protectionist, meaning very and there can be advantages and important aspects to protectionism, and there can be bad aspects to protectionism, right? It can be on the good side to ensure that there are standards and regulations and that people meet them. On the other hand, it can also create a lot of entrenching the status quo and entrenching people with power, right? Um,
Mhm.
Lawyers are very skeptical people. We're
Mhm.
hard to convince, and we're often hard to impress.
Mhm.
Sometimes we think a lot of ourselves, and we can often be very introverted. That's and those are sort of more statistically true, but not necessarily true. So
Yeah.
those are things I would say. Not everything that's on TV for sure is true. But
Mhm.
I find that you can it depends on the cohort you're with too. I have lots of lawyer friends who are well grounded and really interesting people and have very different perspectives on things. And there are also some people that you'll meet in law school or continue to be colleagues with who are not people that you like and are
Yeah.
people that uh, who can think a lot of themselves, people who are very concerned think of them, who are kind of in it for status and power. And so that that's not necessarily untrue. I I think also it's important to remember that you can become that. You don't necessarily start out that way, um, but it can be easy. The entropy sort of law is there and can work on people. And there's a reason that they say power corrupts, right? So
Mhm.
over time, I think it's important if you want to go into law to make sure that you are evaluating, who am I? Who am I becoming? Who do I want to become? And what am I doing to reach those values, to practice those values, to maintain integrity? Because it's something that you have to build and maintain and work at. It doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come accidentally.
Mhm. No, I really agree with that, and that goes back to what you said, like, almost in the beginning that, like, why, sit down and think, like, why do you wanna go into law school, like, plays all back into it. And I know some people don't really care about some of the misconceptions because some of them are those misconceptions, but, like, yeah, you have to think about, like, do I wanna become this and that? So that's
Yeah,
important.
when I look back, for example, Law and Order, like the way that they talk to people sometimes, like what I like to say, I'll watch the TV. I'm sure I annoy my mom like nothing when I'm watching cop shows or law shows because I'm just like, that's illegal. That's illegal. They definitely can't do that. I don't know what they're talking about. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Just like all of these little things. But I'll often watch how both the police and lawyers are portrayed to treat people,
Yeah.
right? Especially people, and go back when they realize someone wasn't the guilty person,
Oh god.
go back and replay the part where they arrested them, called them a
Yeah.
piece of trash, said you're the most horrible person ever, smacked them over the head, did whatever. Like, I'm like, did you go back and apologize?
Yeah,
You know?
for everything.
We used to host pretend like a mock bail hearing in my class, and it used to shock me the
Yeah,
students. I would ask them to play the role of both defense and crown, and what people would come out with as crown attorneys even when they weren't cross-examining the defense,
yeah,
like the accused themselves, it was a third party or someone, and they were just like, isn't it true that your son? I once had a crown attorney ask, um, isn't it safe to say that your son's been a disappointment?
oh my
And
god.
like, why would you? How is that relevant question?
Yeah,
Like, this isn't like what is that? And I was so upset by that,
yeah,
because it's so unnecessary. And this person is
exactly.
coming here volunteering to help out, to try to get this person released. And that's how you treat them.
Yeah,
And what if that person becomes a victim and needs to help? Are they going to call the police if this is how they feel treated by the system? So
exactly.
I think it is important to understand that that's not who lawyers should be. Like, they should
Mhm.
not just be jerks. Um,
Exactly.
uh, and they shouldn't be, that entrenched personally in the issues without, really good cause. But even then, it's not professional. So it's really important to, as much as possible, maintain distance and objectivity, even when you're really passionate about the case.
Exactly, I feel like you need to think about the person you're becoming because you don't wanna be, like, person you just mentioned, like, you don't wanna be mean or hurtful to anyone even though you're maybe deeply involved, so I think that's important for people to know.
And a lot of lawyers won't say anything. They'll just
Yeah,
and a lot of other people won't say anything. They'll just, like, talk about you behind your back, which I think is a really
mhm,
terrible culture that we have. But so I,
exactly.
I try to, when I have those feelings, down with someone afterwards and say, look, you can't do that. You can't, not okay. 'Cause,
Exactly.
we all make mistakes and we don't learn if we don't have people, explain what our mistakes are and help us figure it out.
Mhm, exactly. And I guess that kinda, like, it follows up with that question and also leads to our last question, but, what advice would you give to the next future generation of aspiring legal professionals if you haven't, given some tips already?
Yeah, so a couple things. I mean, I've said some of them.
Yeah.
Don't rush into law school. It's a big investment. Make sure that you are ready for it and that it's what you want to do. And law school is not practicing law. You could hate law school and love the practice of law, or
Yeah.
vice versa. So keep that in mind. Um, and you don't need to know exactly what you want to do in advance. That's okay.
Mhm,
Um, be pragmatic financially as much as you can. Honestly, like you said, a lot of people are really into, getting school over and done with. If you are not financially ready for law school, don't go to law school. Work for a
mhm,
few years, save up some money. Consider if you really want to invest in that and go back to school because, I have colleagues who are graduating with like over 100 grand in debt, and it's a huge pressure on people to stay in jobs they don't like, to try to get jobs that have really high paying salaries, but aren't necessarily what they want to do, aren't necessarily where they want to end up. Um, work them really, really hard, and they feel like they have to constantly compete in order to stay there, etc. So, be as pragmatic as you can. If you can, have multiple roommates and live in a smaller place, and maybe it will be more difficult to study, but you won't be as poor coming out of law school because that's a huge amount of debt to have, and I think it really weighs on people heavily. Work in the summers during your undergrad, to support your undergrad costs as well.
mm,
Work during the school year. Like, you don't have to be totally obsessed with doing extracurriculars and other things like that. Like, having an actual job is fine. If you
yeah,
work at, the student union and you sell coffee in the mornings, like, good. You will have less debt. It's not going to be as glamorous on your resume as the law journal or something else, but that's still okay. It shows that you take responsibility. It shows that you're committed to what you need to do. And um, I think a lot of people think that employers will not think anything of you if you're not in all these fancy extracurricular kind of stuff, but I don't think that's true. um, use transit if you can, other things like
yeah,
that. Definitely do research up front to find a school that's a good fit.
mhm,
I know a lot of people who felt, disappointed in their experiences. Like, if you're going to pay, if you're going to be forking out a minimum of 10 to 15 grand a year for this, like,
mhm,
you wouldn't take that money and invest it in an investment with as little research as sometimes we do on schools and other things like that. And I was kind of guilty of that. I didn't do a ton of research. Um, and I probably didn't pick based on very great criteria. So that's why I sort of say I loved Queens. Don't get me
mhm,
wrong. I did love Queens. It totally worked out for me, but it could have not worked out for me.
mhm,
So definitely do that. Because, if you have a disability and you've gone to a school that really doesn't accommodate that well, that is really going to make or break your experience. Do you know what
yeah,
I mean? Um,
definitely.
so that is really important. Um, Definitely look. Some people consider going to law school outside of Canada if they don't find a place inside Canada, or just to do it faster, or to do particular programs or things like that. Definitely try to speak to people who've done that if you're going to do it.
Mhm,
It can be It can be great in terms of saving money or whatever else it is that you're trying to achieve, but it can be very difficult to get through the bar process.
Yeah.
You end up having to do all these exams by yourself. You end up having to do bar exams with no network. You have no understanding of the job hiring system and how to find articles and other people. I applied for my articles a full year and 7 months in advance of them.
Mhm.
And if you're coming into the job market looking for what's available in the next few months and you're competing with people who applied the year before, it's going to be a lot more stressful and a lot more difficult. So
Yeah.
it can be helpful to understand how that process works and weigh those options if you're thinking about different international um, options that you have, either the US, Australia, UK kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Consider attending a smaller school as
Mhm.
opposed to a bigger school because there can be a lot of benefits in having a closer, tighter network. Um, and consider going somewhere other than you went in undergrad.
Mm.
You get a larger network, right?
Yeah.
And you get a larger amount of resources. A lot of people don't know this, but you can actually get alumni benefits. You can actually get, different things from different networks.
Mhm.
So consider that. Don't just go to the same place because you've already been there. I mean, if you got a good thing going on, sure. Uh, but consider going somewhere else because it can be good to have different experiences. Consider doing exchanges. I'm a big
Mhm.
fan. I did an exchange to NUS when I was in law school in
Nice.
Singapore, and I loved every minute of it. It
Mhm.
was so much fun. Look at different joint programs that are available. Sometimes there are particular spots for joint programs. So sometimes you might be competing in a different sort of plane, and that can be helpful or not helpful, maybe, depending. So that's something that you can consider. Those experiences can be very different as well, though. I found that people who are in like joint master's programs often didn't end up in the same course group the way that we did. So we had like a section and we were always with that section, whereas the people in the master's programs would be in one or two classes and then would be doing their master's program and then would be in another one or two classes and then would be doing whatever. So they got a very different experience in terms of networking and collaborating with students and being in the same group all the time. So that can be a different experience. Um, and Sorry, I brainstormed ahead of time, so I'm kind of looking at stuff.
No, you're
In
good.
terms of activities, don't fight the urge to do everything.
Yeah.
You need to set boundaries because if you try to do everything, sign up for too much and you'll burn yourself out. A lot of students, I find, they'll, for example, like I'm a mentor in the level mentoring program,
Mm.
and students will sign up and then they'll be like, oh, sorry, I'm really busy, really busy, really busy, really busy, right? And then they don't get too much out of it. They miss
Yeah.
sections or whatever it is. So don't be that person who
Yeah.
kind of goes in super exuberant and then has to back away from all the things they made commitments about. It's
Exactly.
better to not make any promises up front and then scale forward rather than trying to scale back once you've
Mhm.
gotten yourself involved in too much. Again, like, learn about yourself, spend a lot of time in self-reflection, figuring out who you are, what your goals are, what you really want to do. Become a planning person. I was not the kind of person who had a calendar when I was in law
Yeah.
school. You need to become that person.
Mm.
So make sure that you manage yourself and that you start planning and making time in your schedule to plan. Um, in terms of activities, pursue growth and development in one thing over doing a whole bunch of different things.
Mm.
So don't do one activity for 1 year, another activity for another year, another activity for another year. Pursue responsibility within something, at least one thing,
Yeah.
right? Stay committed to one thing because that actually says a lot about who you are and the kind of grit that you have. If you've read the book, that's one of her suggestions. But try new things, get outside your box if you can, make meaningful connections, have a backup plan for if things
Mhm.
don't go the way that you want them to.
Definitely.
And again, like, keep your resume up to date and go through those materials. I did my first round of applications without looking at any of the career resource materials. I had a very business resume. It's not the same as a legal resume. So there are a lot of nuances. So definitely figure some of those things out, spend time, invest in research and do your research because it's hard to know those things that you don't know. But
Yeah.
do your best as much as you can and ask questions and hopefully you all have Google in spades compared to what some of us grew up with a little bit
Yeah,
more. So you can
definitely.
find all those things. There are lots of resources out there. So
Mhm.
take advantage if you can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's very helpful information. Again, like you said, I feel like a lot of us nowadays are very stressed and we're very like we don't want to step out of our comfort zone and ask like ourselves why we want to go into it. And like you said, like that's very important to consider. And so I think everything you said, I think everyone should take account into like if either they're an undergrad, even if they're in first year, I think you should start thinking about it. And then also, of course, people who are applying to law school.
It can be very easy to get sucked into what other people want to do,
Yeah.
right? You go to law school and you're like, I want to be a criminal lawyer. And then all of a sudden you realize everyone else
Yeah.
doesn't want to do that. And they're applying to Bay Street firms and they're like, why aren't you applying to this? Why are you not involved in it? It can be a very weird experience to suddenly feel like you are swimming against the stream. And the other
Yeah.
thing that's really difficult is when you're an undergrad, if you're going to law school, you're probably one of the more top performers in your class, right? I
Mhm.
got it beaten out of me in undergrad because my undergrad was already like that.
Yeah.
It was, you know, somewhere between 70 and 90 of us, and we all got 90s in school. I
God.
was marked bell curve. So I immediately, like coming to law school, I was like, oh, I know how this goes. But a lot
Yeah.
of people, that was their first experience not being the smartest person in the room. And a
Mhm.
lot of people go into this whole crisis of who am I even if
Yeah.
I'm not the smartest person, if I'm not, the best athlete and the best this. So there's this very needy kind of sense that people in law school can tend to have where they're emotionally fragile and searching frantically for the thing that they're the best
Yeah.
at because it's not the things they thought it was anymore. So you gotta kind of go back and chill and be like, look, I'm around top performers now. So it's going to be different. I'm not going to be able
Mhm.
to have the same kind of easy success that I've had previously. So I've got to take, the losses on my chin and I've got to learn from my mistakes and I've got to just stay true to who I am. And I deserve to be here just like everybody else does. And, there are also people who probably deserve to be here who aren't as privileged as me. So, you have to stay grounded. You have to have a broad perspective and understand that, it's not just about performance in academic kind of ways, right? You need to be a whole person. You need to really know who you are. You need to really stay true to yourself, and it's okay to value what you value, and for that to be
Yeah.
different than what people value. And also don't be afraid to critique the system, right? There
Mhm.
were, for example, one of the things that I struggled with in law school was all the people who wanted to do fancy moots, and nothing against moots, but I was like, why don't you do the clinic where you can actually help real poor people with your legal skills as opposed to solve fake problems at fancy
Yeah.
dinners that don't matter in the
Mhm.
end, right? And it's not that you can't learn litigation skills and all that kind of thing, but really think about how you're contributing and how you're going to give back, because I think that's our responsibility as lawyers too, is to use the privileges, the skills, the experience that we have. That's what we bring to the table to society, and it's not just for ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's just important to see who you are and not just, pin yourself as, one thing. Like I'm not good at this, so I'm not good at anything. I feel like our generation is really much like that nowadays, especially I feel like law school, med school, a lot of it is like that when you are not even failing if you're not doing as good as you thought you would, you start to doubt yourself. And I think it's important to just remember who you are at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yes, but anyways, those are the end of my questions. I just want to say thank you so much for answering everything today. I think everything you said, everyone watching, I feel like please take account into what you said and, like apply that for when applying to law school and just for your undergrad as well. But so I will just